Today we're going to be talking about cell theory. Your title for today's notes can be just cell theory. So we're going to be talking about how they discovered cells and what they found out and how those principles apply to cells today. So our learning target, I can identify the three components or three parts of the cell theory and provide evidence for each one. So this is what I would expect you to be able to do on a test. In order for us to talk about cell theory, first we have to talk about what a cell is. Okay? Make sure you write this definition down. A cell is the smallest unit of life. What does that mean? It means it's the smallest thing that's considered alive or living. Anything smaller than a cell is not considered alive. So you might know like a nucleus is part of a cell or DNA is inside of a cell. Well, DNA and a nucleus are not alive. They're smaller than a cell. And remember, a cell is the smallest thing that we can consider to be alive. So if you take a look at these pictures, which do you think would be smaller than a cell? You might remember from 8th grade that the periodic table is made up of atoms and elements. These are really, really tiny. Okay, sometimes in biology it's hard to figure out how big something is because a lot of stuff we talk about is really tiny. Well, atoms and elements like carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, all of those make up a cell. Okay, so a cell is matter. It's made up of C's, H's, O's, N's, all of those different elements. So atoms are super, super tiny. They're smaller than a cell. We're going to learn that cells do make up organs and can make up organ systems and organisms too. But the atom is the thing that is smaller than a cell. So here's what happened. A bunch of scientists, were looking under microscopes. This is back in the 1700s, They used microscopes, they invented these microscopes, and they found that when they looked at stuff underneath a microscope, it looked like all these little tiny blobs, And so they called these cells. And from this, they came up with a theory of cells, It's called the cell theory. It talks about what these cells are and where they come from. So the first part of this cell theory is that all organisms are made of one or more cells. Write this down. So all organisms are made of one or more cells. If we take a look at the pictures here, on the left we have plastic and thread. On the right, we have blood, onion, cheek. What's the difference between the pictures on the left and the pictures on the right? So the ones on the left are not living, And we can see there aren't really any circular shapes there, no cells. The ones on the right are living, and there are these repeating, somewhat circular shapes. So these are cells. So what scientists did is they looked at certain things under the microscope and they knew that living things, they saw that they had cells, And when they looked at non-living things, they saw that they weren't made up of cells. All right, the second part here. The cell is the basic unit of structure. It's the building block of living organisms. I like to think of this as like Legos, In order to build an organism, we need to stack up those Legos, Stack up those cells and make an organism. Now, some organisms are just one cell big. For example, this guy right here, Paramecium, he's one big cell, and that's fine. But all organisms are made of at least one or more cells, we saw, So it's the building block, meaning if we take apart any living organism, we see it's built up of cells. And lastly, number 3 here, All cells come from pre-existing cells. Okay, so this is mitosis. We will be talking about this later on, but cells divide. Okay, they split in half. That's what we can see here. This used to be one cell, and it's splitting into two. Okay, so these cells come from pre-existing cells. Scientists used to think that when we got sick, or there were cells, or there was mold, it just came out of the air. Okay, what they didn't realize is that cells actually came from other cells. If we take a look at this video, we can see cells dividing, right? Splitting in half. Okay, so there's one cell up and it splits into two. So that's where cells come from, right? One cell divides into two. They can't just appear out of thin air. One of the things that we talk about is when we get a cut, your cells eventually regrow. And how do they regrow? Well, they divide into two to create new cells for your cut here. So all cells come from pre-existing cells. So these are the three parts of the cell theory. All organisms made of one or more cells, cells the basic unit of structure, and all cells come from pre-existing cells.